September 1st, 1943. Rabaul Airfield, New Britain. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai's hand paused over the intelligence report. His one good eye, his other lost to American gunners a year earlier, scanned the words. And then he laughed out loud. The humid operations tent barely contained his amusement. The Americans have produced a new fighter, heavy as a bomber, wide as a transport. They call it Hellcat. Our intelligence suggests it weighs twice our Zero. Another failure of their design. Through the tent flaps, he could see his squadron's A6M Zero fighters lined up on the pierced steel planking. Sleek, nimble, deadly. For 2 years, these aircraft had dominated the Pacific skies. British Hurricanes, American P-40s, Dutch Brewster Buffaloes, all had fallen before the Zero's guns. The Americans' latest attempt, this bloated Hellcat, would be no different. But what Sakai didn't know, what none of the Japanese naval aviators gathering for their morning briefing knew, was that in exactly 30 days, this failure would begin the systematic annihilation of Japanese naval aviation. The F6F Hellcat would achieve a kill ratio of 19-1. Destroying over 5,200 enemy aircraft while losing only 270 in aerial combat. It would transform carrier warfare, break the back of Japanese air power, and prove that the Zero's reign of terror had been built on a foundation of fatal assumptions. The mathematics of aerial supremacy were about to be rewritten by an aircraft that looked wrong, flew heavy, and seemed to violate every principle the Japanese had perfected. Yet within 6 months, the very pilots, now laughing at intelligence reports, would be writing final letters home, knowing that encountering Hellcats meant statistical certainty of death. The rising sun's zenith. The Japanese Navy's confidence in September 1943 wasn't arrogance, it was mathematics. Since December 7, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Naval Air Service had achieved victory ratios that defied belief. At Pearl Harbor, they lost 29 aircraft while destroying 347. In the Philippines, 7 losses against 103 destroyed. Over Darwin, 2 losses versus 30. The British Far East Fleet's air arm annihilated in days. At the center of this dominance flew the Mitsubishi A6M Zero, an aircraft that had rewritten the rules of fighter design. When captured examples were tested by American engineers in 1942, they initially refused to believe the performance figures. A fighter with the range of a bomber, the maneuverability of a biplane, and the firepower to destroy anything it caught, it seemed impossible. Warrant Officer Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, who would become Japan's ace of aces with 87 confirmed kills, described the Zero in his recovered diary. Flying the Zero is like wearing wings. The aircraft responds to thought, not just control input. American planes fly like trucks, heavy, overbuilt, wasteful. The Zero achieved its miraculous performance through revolutionary design philosophy. Extra superduralumin, a classified aluminum alloy, created a structure 30% lighter than comparable American designs. No armor plate protected the pilot. No self-sealing fuel tanks added weight. Even the radio was often removed to save 30 pounds. Every ounce sacrificed for performance. The intelligence dismissal. The first reports of the F6F Hellcat reached Japanese intelligence through neutral Swedish sources in early 1943. The specifications seemed like propaganda, or perhaps deliberate misinformation. The aircraft weighed 12,186 pounds loaded, while the Zero weighed 5,800. Its wing area spanned 334 square feet with a draggy radial engine. It carried 2,400 rounds of ammunition, armor plate everywhere, bulletproof glass, self-sealing tanks holding 250 gallons of fuel. Captain Minoru Genda, the tactical genius who had planned Pearl Harbor, reviewed the specifications at Combined Fleet Headquarters. The Americans have learned nothing. This Hellcat represents the continuation of their failed philosophy, attempting to overcome pilot skill with weight of machinery. A Zero will fly circles around it. The mathematics seemed to support his assessment. The Zero's wing loading of 22 pounds per square foot gave it a turning radius of 612 feet. The Hellcat's wing loading of 36.5 pounds per square foot suggested a turning radius over 900 feet. In a turning fight, the basis of all Japanese fighter tactics, the Hellcat would be helpless. The first glimpse, September 30th, 1943, Marcus Island. Petty Officer First Class Yoshio Fukui was flying escort for a reconnaissance mission when he spotted them. 6 dark blue shapes climbing from the southeast. His first thought, recorded in his after-action report, B-25 bombers on a strange heading. Then they turned, and he saw the distinctive silhouette. Single engine, massive fuselage, wings that seemed too short for the body. First encounter with F6F type fighter. He would write, initial impression, Americans have mounted fighter guns on a torpedo bomber. Engaged with standard tactics. Standard tactics meant using the Zero's superior turn rate to get on the enemy's tail. Fukui rolled into a diving turn, expecting the heavy American fighter to continue straight, allowing him to curve onto its 6 o'clock position. Instead, something unprecedented happened. The Hellcat didn't run. It didn't try to turn with him. It went vertical. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, producing 2,000 horsepower, 700 more than the Zero's Nakajima Sakae's 1,130 horsepower, drove the Hellcat upward at 3,500 feet per minute. Fukui, attempting to follow, watched his airspeed decay as the Zero struggled against gravity. At 15,000 feet, the Hellcat performed a maneuver that shouldn't have been possible for its weight, a hammerhead turn that dropped it directly onto Fukui's tail. The American opened fire at 400 meters, Fukui reported. 6 machine guns, not the 4 we expected. The volume of fire was unprecedented. My aircraft took 17 hits in 3 seconds. Only by dropping into a spin did I escape. Fukui survived, barely making it back to Marcus Island with his Zero riddled with holes. His wingman, Petty Officer Second Class Mosso, didn't return. Neither did the reconnaissance plane they were escorting. First blood to the Hellcat, the weight paradox.
The Lee Gulf Record. October 24th, 1944. The Battle of Leyte Gulf. Commander David McCampbell would set his single-mission record during this battle. Leading 7 Hellcats from Essex, he intercepted a force of 60 Japanese aircraft heading for the American fleet. In the ensuing 90-minute battle, McCampbell shot down 9 aircraft, 5 Zeros and 4 bombers, while his wingman, Roy Rushing, destroyed 6 more. "I ran out of ammunition after the 9th kill," McCampbell recorded, his voice betraying disbelief. "The Hellcat performed flawlessly throughout. Not a single hit on my aircraft, despite being outnumbered 8-1. This engagement demonstrated the complete reversal of air superiority. 7 Hellcats had routed 60 Japanese aircraft, destroying 15 without losing a single one. McCampbell's 2 ace-in-a-day performances, 7 kills on June 19th and 9 on October 24th, earned him the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross. The psychological collapse that followed, it wasn't merely the loss of machines, it was the unraveling of spirit. The aftermath of the Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf battles produced what Japanese military psychologists later termed Hellcat psychosis among surviving pilots. Admiral Osawa, in his after-action report, wrote, "The enemy's radar-guided fighter direction achieved something we thought impossible: the industrialization of air combat." Each Hellcat wasn't an individual fighter, but a component in a vast machine. Our pilots, no matter how skilled, were engaging not planes, but a system. The pilot shortage became so acute that by early 1945, training was reduced to 40 to 50 hours for Navy pilots, 60 to 70 hours for Army pilots. Kamikaze pilots received only 40 to 50 hours total, approximately 7 days of training before being sent to die. The Okinawa Apocalypse, April to June 1945, Operation Iceberg, launched a wave of desperation. The Japanese sent 1,900 kamikaze sorties against the American fleet off Okinawa. The Hellcat wasn't just a fighter anymore. It became the shield against the madness. Lieutenant Eugene Valencia, leading his Flying Circus division of Hellcats, shot down 23 Japanese aircraft during the campaign. His tactical innovations, using divisions of 4 aircraft in coordinated attacks, made traditional Japanese tactics suicidal. "We developed what we called the mowing machine," Valencia explained with a grin. 4 Hellcats in a line of breast separated by 100 yards would sweep through Japanese formations at high speed. Each pilot covered his sector. We'd make one pass, climb back to altitude, and repeat. The mathematics of the Okinawa campaign, stark, terrifying. Hellcats flew 38,038 combat sorties, claiming 2,351 victories against only 249 losses, a 9.5-to-1 ratio. More significantly, They prevented approximately 80% of kamikaze aircraft from reaching their targets. The technology chasm, by 1945, had become unbridgeable. The F6F Hellcat incorporated improvements that made it even deadlier. Water injection, boosting power to 2,200 horsepower. Zero-length rocket launchers, improved armor, and the K-14 computing gun sight that calculated deflection automatically. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's legendary ace, with 28 official victories, though modern historians estimate closer to 15, encountered Hellcats for the first time in June 1944. Despite his skill and experience, he was nearly killed in his first engagement. "I performed my best aerobatics," he wrote in his autobiography. "Loops, rolls, splits, every maneuver I had perfected over 200 combats. The Hellcat followed easily, almost casually. I survived only because the American pilot made an error. He forgot to release his drop tank before combat." The human cost accounting. By war's end, the F6F Hellcat had destroyed 5,223 enemy aircraft in aerial combat, lost only 270 aircraft to enemy fighters, achieved a kill ratio of 19.3 to 1, produced 305 U.S. Navy aces, and accounted for 75% of all Navy air-to-air victories. The human cost for Japan was catastrophic. Of the 18,000 naval aviators who had started the war, fewer than 100 combat-experienced pilots remained by August 1945. The kamikaze equation. The transformation of Japanese naval aviation from an elite force to kamikaze operations represented the ultimate admission of Hellcat superiority. Unable to compete conventionally, Japan turned its pilots into guided missiles. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, father of the kamikaze program, justified it with stark mathematics. If a Zero attacks a carrier conventionally, probability of success is near zero. The Hellcats will destroy it. If the Zero becomes a bomb, probability of hitting increases to 30%. The pilot dies either way. At least as a kamikaze, his death has meaning. On October 25, 1944, Hiroyoshi Nishizawa escorted the first official kamikaze mission, led by Yukio Seki, claiming his 86th and 87th victories, 2 F6F Hellcats in the process. The next day, October 26, 1944, Nishizawa died as a passenger aboard a transport shot down by Hellcats from the F-14. Japan's greatest ace, helpless without a fighter, fell to the very aircraft he had briefly bested. The final testimony. August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito's surrender broadcast. At Atsugi Airfield, Captain Minoru Genda, who dismissed the Hellcat as weight over finesse, listened to the Emperor's words. Around him sat the remnants of Japanese naval aviation.
Pilots with 40 hours of flight time, aircraft cobbled together from spare parts, empty fuel tanks. That same day, Ensign Clarence Moore of VF-31, flying from USS Bellewood, shot down a Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber after 2 p.m., the last aerial victory of World War II. The Japanese pilot, apparently unaware of the surrender, was approaching the American fleet when Moore intercepted him. 2 short bursts from the Hellcat's 6 guns ended the Pacific Air War. The Occupation Revelation. September 1945, Atsugi Airfield. The first American aircraft to land after the surrender were 12 F6F Hellcats from USS Yorktown. Japanese pilots, mechanics, and ground crew lined the runway to see their tormentor up close. American pilot Lieutenant Robert Vatu, ace with 19 victories, demonstrated the Hellcat's capabilities to Japanese pilots. His casual aerobatics, loops, rolls, and climbs that would have torn a Zero apart left them speechless. "You have to understand," Vatu told them through an interpreter. "This isn't even pushing it. In combat with water injection, it's 20% more powerful. The plane is stressed for 13 Gs. I've never managed to break one." The engineering postmortem. Japanese engineers studying captured Hellcats after the war discovered the true extent of American industrial superiority. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine contained 2,804 precision-machined parts, each interchangeable with any other R2800 engine. The Nakajima Sakai required hand-fitting of components. No 2 engines were exactly alike. Professor Jiro Horikoshi, designer of the Zero, studied the Hellcat extensively after the war. His conclusion, devastating. "We designed an aircraft for 1941. They designed an aircraft system for 1945. While we were perfecting the sword, they were building the industrial age." The production miracle. Grumman's production of the Hellcat itself became a weapon. The Bethpage, New York factory operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. At peak production, a new Hellcat rolled off the assembly line every 60 minutes. The company produced 12,275 Hellcats in 30 months, a feat the Japanese couldn't comprehend. In 1944, Japan produced 5,100 fighters of all types. America produced 35,000 fighters that year alone. The production system included innovations that seemed impossible to Japanese observers. Workers using color-coded instructions to assemble complex components, shifts operating around the clock, quality maintained despite speed. The strategic revolution.
The Hellcat didn't just win battles, it revolutionized naval warfare. Pre-war doctrine assumed carriers were vulnerable platforms, needing to strike first to survive. The Hellcat inverted this assumption. Carriers became fortresses that could absorb and repel any air attack. Admiral Mark Mitchell, commander of Task Force 58, understood this transformation. With the Hellcat, he explained, we don't need to find them first. Let them come. The F6F will destroy them at our convenience. This confidence allowed unprecedented offensive operations. American carriers could park off enemy coastlines for weeks, their Hellcat umbrellas making them essentially invulnerable to air attack. The cultural collision. Beyond technology, the Hellcat represented a cultural philosophy that invalidated Japanese military doctrine. The samurai tradition emphasized individual excellence, spiritual strength, and acceptance of death. The Hellcat embodied systematic efficiency, material superiority, and preservation of life. This philosophical gulf meant Japanese pilots couldn't adapt to Hellcat tactics, even when they understood them. The concept of refusing combat when disadvantaged, fundamental to Hellcat doctrine, was literally unthinkable to Japanese pilots trained in Bushido. The judgment of history. In 1962, the United States Navy held a symposium on Pacific War aviation. American and Japanese veterans gathered to discuss the conflict with historical perspective. Captain David McCampbell, the Navy's ace of aces with 34 victories, stated simply, "The Hellcat won the Pacific Air War, period. It destroyed Japanese aviation and made our victory inevitable." Commander Saburo Sakai responded, "The Zero was a superior fighter. The Hellcat was a superior weapon system. We never understood the difference until too late. We brought swords to a gunfight and wondered why we lost." The ultimate reckoning. The Hellcat's dominance can be reduced to simple mathematics that tell a profound story. Kill ratio, 19-to-1 overall, 13-to-1 specifically against Zeros. Hellcats produced 12,275 in 30 months, while Zeros produced, from 1943 to 1945, approximately 6,000. American pilots trained on Hellcats numbered over 5,000. Japanese pilots remaining by August 1945, fewer than 100 combat-capable. Admiral Jusaburo Ozawa, who had commanded the Japanese fleet at the Philippine Sea, provided perhaps the most honest assessment. "We laughed at the Hellcat because we didn't understand it represented not just an aircraft, but an entire civilization's approach to war. By the time we stopped laughing, our air forces had ceased to exist." The last word. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai lived until the year 2000. In his final interview, he was asked about the Hellcat. His response captured the totality of its dominance. The Zero made Japan a great naval power. The Hellcat made Japan realize it was never as great as it believed. We thought we were samurai. The Hellcat showed us we were just men with outdated weapons facing the future. Every Japanese pilot who survived the war survived because a Hellcat pilot chose to let them live. That is the ultimate defeat, existing at your enemy's discretion. The F6F Hellcat entered service weighing twice what the Zero weighed, carrying armor the Zero didn't have, powered by an engine the Japanese couldn't build, armed with weapons they couldn't match, guided by radars they couldn't detect, flown by pilots they couldn't equal in training, and produced in numbers they couldn't comprehend. The Japanese pilots had laughed at it because they didn't understand that every extra pound represented not weakness, but the strength of an industrial democracy that could afford to protect its warriors. By the time they understood, their laughter had turned to last letters home, their mockery to kamikaze missions, their confidence to complete collapse. The Hellcat hadn't just defeated the Zeros, it had destroyed an entire philosophy of warfare, proving that in modern combat, the nation that could build the better system would destroy the nation that could only build better warriors. The Japanese pilots had laughed at the F6F Hellcat. The Hellcat had the last laugh. It always did. By 1962, the past wasn't forgotten. American and Japanese veterans sat together, sharing memories the decades hadn't erased. Faces lined with age, eyes heavy with loss, but hearts still haunted by what the skies had decided. Captain David McCampbell, the Navy's ace of aces, with 34 confirmed victories, spoke without embellishment. The Hellcat won the Pacific Air War, period. It destroyed Japanese aviation and made our victory inevitable. Commander Saburo Sakai, once dismissive of weight over finesse, nodded with quiet resignation. The Zero was a superior fighter, but the Hellcat was a superior weapon system. We never understood the difference until too late. He glanced at his comrades, remembering their faces, their funerals, the letters sent back home. We brought swords to a gunfight and wondered why we lost. The ultimate reckoning wasn't just about tactics. It was about the collapse of an entire way of thinking. The Hellcat's dominance, when you break it down, it becomes mathematics. Numbers that tell a story deeper than any battle map. A kill ratio 19-1 overall, against Zeros 13-1. Relentless, unforgiving. 12,275 Hellcats built in 30 months. Pauses. Zeros barely 6,000 from 1943 to 1945. Over 5,000 American pilots trained on Hellcats, flying in coordinated squadrons, while fewer than 100 Japanese pilots, combat-ready, left by August 1945. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, commander at the Philippine Sea, offered perhaps the most honest reflection. We laughed at the Hellcat because we didn't understand. It wasn't just a plane. It was a civilization's approach to war. By the time we stopped laughing, Our air forces had ceased to exist. The last word belonged to Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, survivor of countless battles, witness to the end of a dream. He lived until the year 2000, when, in his final interview, he was asked about the Hellcat. His response captured everything. The Zero made Japan a great naval power, but the Hellcat made Japan realize it was never as great as it believed. We thought we were samurai. The Hellcat showed us we were just men with outdated weapons facing the future. Every Japanese pilot who survived the war survived because a Hellcat pilot chose to let them live. That is the ultimate defeat, existing at your enemy's discretion. The F6F Hellcat entered service weighing twice what the Zero weighed, carrying armor the Zero never had, powered by engines the Japanese couldn't replicate. Armed with weapons unmatched, guided by radars unseen, flown by pilots outclassing their opponents, produced in numbers the Japanese couldn't fathom. They laughed at it, thinking weight was weakness, not realizing every extra pound was a shield, a promise, a system built to endure. By the time they understood, their laughter had turned to farewell letters home, their mockery into desperate kamikaze missions, their confidence into collapse. The Hellcat didn't just defeat the Zero, it destroyed an entire philosophy of warfare. In modern combat, the nation that built the better system destroyed the nation that could only build better warriors. The Japanese pilots had laughed at the F6F Hellcat. The Hellcat had the last laugh. It always did.
The F6F6 Hellcat story wasn't merely one of machines or statistics or battlefield victories. It was a mirror, reflecting a clash of cultures, philosophies, and the unforgiving calculus of industrial power. The Zero, a marvel of engineering, built with purpose, streamlined for aerial artistry, unmatched in dogfighting elegance. It was the embodiment of discipline, skill, and spiritual resilience. Yet, elegance wasn't enough. The Hellcat, built heavy, armored, loud with firepower, designed not for grace, but for endurance, efficiency, and the relentless preservation of life. To the Japanese, this was an insult, a betrayal of ideals, that war should be a test of personal courage, not a contest of industrial might. They fought not just an enemy aircraft, but an enemy philosophy, one that refused to play by their rules, that turned every maneuver into a calculation, every sortie into coordinated precision. The American pilots called it energy fighting, transforming every advantage, altitude, speed, into a weapon sharper than any blade. A pair of Hellcats, one high, one low, executing attacks not like warriors, but like machines, flawless, unforgiving. And when Japanese pilots, trained in the art of sacrifice, faced such calculated efficiency, it shattered their confidence, their spirit, their sense of purpose. By the end of the war, the Japanese Navy had sent boys, barely trained, into the skies with fuel tanks empty, radios silent, and eyes clouded by hopeless resolve. They turned their swords into guided bombs, their courage into desperation, their final act into an admission that survival was impossible. The Hellcat's roar wasn't merely a sound, it was a signal that a new era had arrived, one where war was no longer fought in duels of honor, but in factories, in supply chains, in calculation rooms, in systems that valued life and knew how to protect it. When Professor Jiro Horikoshi, the mind behind the Zero, studied the captured Hellcats after the war, he came to a conclusion that tore at the fabric of pride. We designed an aircraft for 1941. They designed an aircraft system for 1945. We had perfected the sword, while they built the industrial age. And in that contrast lay the fate of nations. At the factories, at the front lines, at the command posts, at the hangars filled with bullet casings, the story repeated itself, day after day, sortie after sortie. A new Hellcat every hour, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Over 12,000 Hellcats rolling off assembly lines, unstoppable, unrelenting, a testament to a nation's will to win, not through sacrifice alone, but through ingenuity, investment, and relentless perseverance. While Japan struggled to produce a fraction, barely able to supply spare parts, forced to send barely trained boys into the skies, armed with courage, but nothing else. In the end, numbers spoke louder than slogans, systems louder than bravery, endurance louder than elegance. The Hellcat wasn't just a fighter, it was a revolution, a symbol of modern warfare, a machine that turned battles into mathematics and mathematics into victory. And as the skies darkened and the sun set on the Pacific Theater, the echoes of its guns, its engines, its relentless advance remained, the last laugh of a weapon that changed the course of history.
As the echoes of the Hellcat's engines fade into history, we are left not just with the story of planes and battles, but with a profound lesson. That in war, as in life, strength alone is not enough. That courage, however noble, must be supported by wisdom, preparation, and unity. The Japanese pilots, brave souls who soared through impossible odds, who fought with honor even as the odds stacked against them, remind us that human spirit can endure even when overwhelmed.
And the American pilots, steady, disciplined, working as a system, protecting each other, teaching us that true strength comes from cooperation, innovation, and the refusal to give up. Their story, a tribute to resilience, to sacrifice, and to the transformative power of technology to shift the course of history. As we close this chapter, let us remember the faces, the dreams, the fears, the hopes of every pilot, every mechanic, every sailor who gave everything so that the skies might be safe and the future might be brighter. If this story touched your heart, if you felt the weight of their courage, if you want to journey deeper into the untold tales of history, stay with us. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like if you enjoyed the storytelling. It means the world to us, and it helps us bring you more of these incredible stories from the skies and beyond. Thank you for being part of this journey, for remembering, for honoring, and for keeping these stories alive. Until next time, fly high and let history guide your way.